On this episode of Laid Back History, we're talking about the Washington and Jefferson 11 and their trip to Pasadena, California to play in the Tournament of Roses football game. I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of Laid Back History. And today we're talking about what I think is a fascinating subject, and it is that Washington Jefferson College in 1922 played in what is now known as the Rose Bowl. At that time, it was still called the Tournament of Roses football game. And it's incredible to think, when we think about football today, and you have Division I, II, and III, and even Division I is broken up in the BCS and the FBS or whatever it is. It's incredible to think that W&J played in the Rose Bowl. But in 1922, they didn't have all the divisions like you have now. You had college football, and the teams played each other, and the best played the best. And so W&J, they have a storied history in football, especially nowadays in Division III, but they were good back then too, and they had several very good years of teams. And it just kind of culminated in 1921 and then 1922 with this trip to the Rose Bowl to play the California Golden Bears. And so I want to talk a little bit about that today. And because today, 2 days ago, would have been the 100th anniversary of them playing in the Rose Bowl. And so it's a fascinating story to me. And I thought it would be a great subject to cover here. Now, as I said, the team had good players and had good teams, but the 1921-22 club, everything just seemed to click. They had an incredible offensive line. Their defensive line was almost as good. They had a very good running back by the name of Burkhart, and they had a star quarterback, Charles Pruner West. And Charles West is an incredible story all into himself. He's an Olympian, ends up becoming a doctor. He's the first African-American quarterback to play in the Rose Bowl. And he's a fascinating story, so much so that we are going to cover him more. We're going to do an entire episode on Pruner West in February for Black History Month. So I'm not going to talk a lot about him today. I want to talk about the team in general, but I promise you he's not being ignored. We're going to talk a lot about him in February. But as I said, things were coming together for the team in 1922 or 1921. They started off basically just steamrolling opponents. And they weren't playing slouches. They played Syracuse. They played Pitt. I'm trying to think. Who else did they play? West Virginia. They played West Virginia. So they played some really good teams who today we think of like not powerhouses so much with Pitt and Syracuse, but they used to be. Pitt was good this year. But, good teams, bigger schools. I mean, W&J had 450 students in the school in 1921. So you're playing against schools that have thousands and thousands of students. And yet W&J is just steamrolling them. In fact, they would end up outscoring opponents. I think it was 231 to 33. So they scored 231 points compared to 33 points by their opponents. And they were stifling them with their defense. Teams just couldn't break them. No matter what, whether you ran against them or tried to pass against them, their defensive line was just really good, put so much pressure on them. Teams couldn't run, they couldn't pass. It wasn't that they were lucky if they scored a touchdown or scored a point. They were sometimes lucky to get a first down. I mean, W&J was that good. Their games against Pitt, West Virginia, Syracuse, they pretty much dominated them. I mean, it's amazing to think that, but they did. They dominated them. And so, with their victories, they were considered the champion in the East. So you have in the Rose Bowl, or the Tournament of Roses football game, you had the Western champion playing the Eastern champion. So California won the West. This particular year, they outscored their opponents, I think, 331 to 33. Still only gave up 33 points, but they scored another 100 points over W&J during their season. The year before, 1921, in the Rose Bowl, California beat Ohio State 28-0, just hammered them. They were a high-powered offense, and they just steamrolled teams. There was an ad or a graphic in a paper in where was it? Was it in Pasadena? I don't remember exactly where it was from, but it had their quarterback, a gentleman by the name of Mueller, and it says that he's going to assassinate the presidents. They just expected California to steamroll W&J, quite honestly. To them, they were just this little nobody school in this little nowhere town in Pennsylvania. But before the game could be played, W&J had to get there. They actually had to get to California. Now, when California was invited to play in the Tournament of Roses football game, they basically said, okay, we'll play. We want $50,000 to play. Where when W&J was invited, they were just excited to play. They didn't ask for anything. Now the Tournament of Roses directors said they would cover some of the cost for the trip to California because W&J had to travel so far. But even still, the college didn't have money, really a lot of money to put into the trip. So when W&J went, they took 11 players. They couldn't even take the entire team. They took 11 players with them. The president of the college I believe he had to mortgage his house to pay for the trip to California. So the college really wasn't covering a lot of the costs. Well, it's an interesting story because they have this long train ride, across the United States. And what happens is that in Kansas City, one of the players from W&J contracted pneumonia. His name was C.L. Spillers, and in Kansas City, he had to be hospitalized. And so now they're down to 10 players. But as the story goes, another player, a 12th player, had basically stowed away on the train. A gentleman by the name of, his nickname was Bucky Buchanan, had stowed away on the train. And so when Spillers had to be left in Kansas City, they gave Bucky the ticket and he went the rest of the way with the team. So he ends up playing in the game. So thank God this guy stowed away on the train, or they may not have had 11 players to be able to play. Calling somebody out of the stands to come play with them. But they finally get there, and they're kind of in awe of what's going on. You've got this huge parade. There was a W&J float that was in the parade, but they're just excited to be there. But they didn't let it go to their heads. They weren't overwhelmed. That was one of the big things that was said, is that it was a huge stage for them. It was the furthest they've ever been from home. The best team they've ever played, probably by far, on the biggest stage. And yet they kept their cool, they kept their heads. And when they took the field that day, when those 11 players took the field, to 50,000 fans screaming in the stadium, it wasn't too much for them. It wasn't too much for them. They had to deal with this incredible passing offense of California, who still had an excellent running game. And it was said they had the best offensive line in college football. It was said that their offensive line could match up against any professional team. They were that good. And so W&J had their hands full. Well, right from the get-go, it actually, the California fans were excited because they kicked off, and it was a good kickoff, and and I can't remember his name, the W&J players fielded the kickoff and was immediately set upon by two players and tackled right there. And so the California fans are going crazy, and oh yeah, this is what you get. We're gonna take you down. And then W&J proceeds to drive down the field and crosses into California territory. Now, I want to give you an idea. The field, it had rained for 2 days before, so the field was a little muddy. It wasn't a pristine field, but W&J just hammered them. They were hammering the defensive line for California, pushing them back, creating holes, and they went easily down the field. But California then stiffened up, it stopped them, and W&J was forced to punt. So, interestingly enough, the punter for W&J, Wayne Burkhart, was also their kicker and their running back. So he was pulling a lot of duties there. The whole team did. They had 11 players. They played both ways. Every player played every snap of the game. So, where California had a full complement of players, W&J was playing 11 guys the entire game. Well, it goes back and forth. California can't move the ball at all. They are just being stifled by this W&J defensive line. And so they're forced to punt. W&J pushes down the field a little bit, but then they have to punt. It was almost like a bend but don't break defense by California at that point, where W&J was getting some first downs and making some moves, but they just couldn't punch through. But then in the second quarter, Burkhart takes off. He breaks to his left and heads down the field. And he is able to break free, and he finds an opening. He breaks free. 35 yards later, touchdown. W&J scores. They're up 6-0. But unfortunately, a penalty was called. The captain of the Presidents, Russell Stein, he was an All-American, was called for offsides. Now, according to the Pittsburgh Daily Gazette, it was a very questionable call that even the California fans were surprised by the call. But the touchdown was called back. And so the first half ends in a 0-0 tie. The second half goes about the same way. The two sides are just beating on each other. California can't get any yards. They're barely making any yardage. They haven't completed a pass yet. This vaunted passing offense has not completed a pass, and W&J is forcing it, basically right down their throats, gaining yardage through running. Pruner West is he's running, he's passing. But with the field as muddy as it is, it basically turns into a slugfest. And so all through the second half, that's what it is. The punter's got a lot of work. And unfortunately, at the end of the game, or maybe fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the game ends in a 0-0 tie. This small school, this small W&J school from this nowhere town, a school of 450 kids, they've tied the Wonders, the California Golden Bears, the best team in the country. They have tied them on the biggest stage. And people are stunned. Papers in California, they can't believe it. Who are these players? They're questioning, who is this W&J team and how could they possibly have tied the Golden Bears? And really, they should have won. Think about this. If that touchdown is not called back, W&J is possibly the national champions. They beat the best team in the country. But even without that, how amazing is it that this school, they left their comfort zone. It's far behind them. It's thousands of miles away. And they're in front of 50,000 people, the biggest crowd they've ever played in front of on the biggest stage. And not only do they hold their own, they show they're the better team. It may have ended up 0-0, but the only team to cross midfield, the only team to complete a pass, the only team to enter the end zone, even though it was called back, is W&J. They gave up 2 first downs in 49 yards. Golden Bears made 49 yards of progress. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. They stifled them. They shut them down for the first time. They were shut out for the first time in like 10 years. W&J shuts them down. It is still the only Rose Bowl to end in a tie. And what an amazing performance from this little school. And as I said, Pruner West would go on to the Olympics. He did some, and some incredible things. But this entire team, they were celebrated not just by Washington, but throughout the East. People were sending them telegrams, Western Union telegrams, telling them how proud they were, how excited they were. And they had the support not just of Washington, PA, not just of Washington County, but of the entire Eastern United States. People were celebrating them. And when they got back, they had bonfires, they had celebrations. The newspapers in the area couldn't say enough good about them. And the newspapers in California didn't know what to say. How did California possibly not just hammer these little, this small little school with 11 players? How did the presidents stand up to them? And they did. It's really an incredible story. It's amazing that they were able to first off make it to this game, but not only that, but prove that they were as good, if not better, than the Golden Bears. So amazing story. We're sitting here, like I said, just a couple days after the 100-year anniversary of it. I hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll be back next week with a new episode of Searchers. We're continuing our work over at the John Julius Lemoyne House. So we have an all new episode of Searchers. And then I'm going to start a series on lost states, just something to talk about some of the ideas for new states that had come about that included our portion of Pennsylvania. So we're going to talk about Vandalia, talk about Westlvania, and also talk about a very random and obscure idea for a state called Hazard. So we're going to talk about those. We'll probably do that in a 3-part series, and then I'm excited about some of the stuff we have for Black History Month. So thank you for joining me, and we will see you next week for an all-new episode